Have you ever heard the tale of Lonesome Luke and the bandit Ruby? It began one dusty evening, when young Luke rode into a gunfight and saved a stagecoach from a bandit raid. Among the wreckage he found her, Ruby, the outlaw beauty with fire in her eyes and blood on her hands. He should have left her to die, but he didn't. Nursing her wounds, he found himself tangled in her words, her laughter, her silence. And though he fought it, something inside him began to change. A cowboy sworn to justice, and a woman born to defy it. The town would whisper of how the bandit slipped away. But what they'll never know is the truth Luke carries alone. That in one reckless moment, he set her free, not with iron or bullets, but with his heart. The noon sun burned mercilessly over the plains, spreading its white light across the endless dust. Luke, a young cowboy with a lean build and restless gaze, rode the trade road, his horse's hooves sinking into sand. He wasn't searching for trouble, few men ever did, but in the West, trouble had a way of finding its own. A low rumble reached his ears, like thunder crawling across the ground. Luke pulled the reins and stopped, hand instinctively on his revolver. Moments later, a plume of dust appeared, rolling closer until the shapes of horses and a stagecoach burst through the haze. Shouts and gunfire tore the still air apart. Bandits! Luke pressed his lips into a hard line. He could have turned away, let fate play out, but he wasn't made of silence that ignores injustice. He spurred his horse forward, drawing his Colt. The desert erupted, bullets cracking, horses screaming, passengers crying out. One guard fired back but was quickly outnumbered. Luke joined the fray with the cold precision of a man who'd lived too long with steel in hand. His revolver barked twice, dropping a rider who tumbled from his saddle like a rag doll. Another shot forced the gang to scatter, confusion rising as easy prey grew teeth. Dust whirled in choking clouds, the sharp smell of powder stinging his nose. The fight ended as quickly as it began. Two bandits lay sprawled in the sand, the others fleeing in curses and pounding hooves. The coach shuddered to a halt, its terrified horses trembling and slick with sweat. Passengers, pale and shaken, scrambled into the roadside scrub, their belongings forgotten. Luke swung down from his saddle, heart still hammering. He moved cautiously, scanning for wounded. That's when he saw her. A young woman lay in the sand, dark hair spilling loose, a crimson scarf pressed to her side where blood seeped through. Her revolver, still warm, rested inches from her pale fingers. Luke knelt beside her. Her eyes opened, green as bottled glass, sharp and defiant even in pain. She didn't look at him like a savior, she looked at him like an enemy. "Leave me," she hissed, ragged yet laced with fire. His jaw tightened. He knew her face from whispers and bounty posters. Ruby. The outlaw woman. For a long moment Luke hung between two instincts, the lawman's duty to let her die and the human pull that would not abandon anyone to vultures. The desert was cruel, but he wouldn't be. Not today, he muttered. Sliding his arms beneath her, he lifted her onto his horse. She cursed, struggled, then collapsed. Luke mounted, securing her with one arm as he turned his horse toward the horizon. Behind them, the road still stank of gunpowder and fear, the kind of place that swallowed men whole. Ahead lay only the unknown, a wounded outlaw in his arms, a town that would never forgive him, and a story already written into his blood. That day, carrying Ruby from the dust, Luke lost his heart, not to bullets, but to a bandit's fire. The ride back to Luke's homestead stretched long beneath the dying sun. His horse labored under the weight of two, sweat shining across its flanks. Ruby drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering curses tangled with fragments of old songs. Luke kept his eyes forward, jaw locked, trying to ignore the heat of her body against his arm and the smell of smoke and leather in her hair. By the time they reached his cabin, the horizon had bled into violet. The small house stood lonely against the plain, a shape cut from timber and stubbornness. Luke carried Ruby inside, laying her on the narrow bed. Her green eyes fluttered open, hard as emeralds even in weakness. "You'll regret this, cowboy," she whispered, lips trembling with pain. Luke ignored her. He fetched a basin, tore strips from an old shirt, and set about cleaning the wound. Each time the cloth pressed to her flesh, she hissed, not just from pain, but with a mocking smile. "Careful," she said, velvet and sharp. "If you patch me too well, I might rob you when I'm better." Luke's hand paused only a second. He'd expected defiance, perhaps pleading, not her laughter, low and daring, rising in the quiet cabin like a challenge. "You've got a choice," she went on. "Turn me in and play hero. Or keep me here and see what happens when you feed a wolf instead of shooting it." Luke wrapped the bandage tighter, refusing her gaze. "You'll rest here until you can ride. After that, you're gone." Ruby chuckled, wincing. "And what if I don't want to leave?" The fire popped, filling silence with sparks. Luke stared into the flames, unsure whether he wanted her gone, or feared it. Her presence shifted the air, turning the cabin restless, as though the walls themselves strained to listen. As night deepened, Ruby spoke, not of bandits or ambush, but of a childhood on the edge of camps, a father lost to drink, a mother buried nameless. Her words drifted like smoke, sometimes tender, sometimes bitter. Luke listened against his better judgment. He should have pressed her for secrets, but instead let her voice weave into his silence. When she laughed, it was quick and wild, daring the world to break her. When she grew quiet, her eyes reached beyond the cabin walls. Through it all, she never stopped watching him, prying at the armor he wore around his heart. Luke felt the weight of his revolver on the table, yet for the first time it brought no comfort. He sat across from Ruby, firelight painting her face in shifting amber. She was dangerous, he knew it. But danger drew a man closer, like a moth to flame. Outside, the wind swept the shutters. Inside, two souls shared a roof, a cowboy bound by rules, and a bandit who treated rules as chains. Neither admitted it, but both knew something had begun, sharp and uncertain as the line between law and outlaw. And before the night was over, each would wonder who truly kept whom prisoner. The hours after midnight stretched heavy and long. Luke dozed lightly in the chair by the fire, revolver within reach. The logs had burned to embers, filling the cabin with a dull glow. Ruby lay still on the bed, chest rising in steady rhythm. Or so it seemed. Her eyes opened once his breathing slowed. Emerald glints caught the firelight. She slid a hand to her bandage, testing strength. Pain flared but didn't stop her. She waited until silence held the cabin. Then she moved. Ruby eased from the bed, boots muffled on wood. At the window she worked the latch, moonlight spilling silver across her hands. She glanced back. Luke slept upright, stern even in rest. For a heartbeat, hesitation flickered. Then the window groaned, and she slipped through, landing cat-like outside. Cool night wrapped her in sage and distant rain. Her eyes darted to the corral. The door slammed. Luke's voice cut sharp, "Thought you could vanish." Ruby spun, hair burning in moonlight. Too far to run, she squared her shoulders. Luke stepped down, revolver in hand but lowered. "Get back inside." Ruby laughed. "And miss a dance under the moon." She lunged. He caught her wrist, both colliding in dust and will. Her wound slowed her, but not her ferocity. Knee, block, press, half battle, half something unspoken. For a moment she twisted free. "You're strong, cowboy, but strength doesn't mean you'll win." She struck, he staggered, then pinned her against the fence post. Their faces inches apart, breath mingling. Her lips curved. "You should have shot me when you had the chance." "Maybe I should have," he said, voice edged with anger and admiration. The horse snorted, wind whispered. Luke bound her wrists with a rope strip, leading her back inside. Ruby didn't resist, chin high, eyes gleaming as if she'd won. The fire had nearly died, but heat between them burned sharper. Luke forced her to sit. Ruby leaned back, bound and smirking. "Guess I'll be staying after all," she murmured, smoke in her voice. Luke said nothing, but he knew the battle was his too, against his own heart, which no rope could bind. The cabin felt smaller with Ruby tied to the chair, wrists bound but spirit untamed. Luke sat across from her, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the fire. He told himself the rope was enough. But the real danger wasn't in her hands, it burned in her gaze. Ruby tilted her head, a smile tugging at her lips. You tie knots like a ranch hand, not a lawman. Ever wonder why the sheriff's star never suited you? Luke stayed silent. You don't want glory, she pressed, voice low. You want quiet. Land. Maybe a family. A life no one writes songs about. But quiet men never survive in this world, Luke. His eyes narrowed. You speak as if you've survived. Ruby's laugh was soft, bitter. I've done more than survive. I've stolen life by the handful before it could steal from me. Tell me, cowboy, what have you ever stolen for yourself? He clenched his fists, tempted to remind her she was a liar, a criminal. But her words cut deeper than he wanted to admit. He'd lived by rules, by duty, never straying. Yet firelight in her hair, molten green in her eyes, his code faltered. You've never broken a rule, have you? She murmured. Rules keep men alive. Rules keep men empty. Sparks popped up the chimney. He tried to see only the outlaw, but her voice clung like smoke. She spoke of stolen nights and wilder dreams, hunger for freedom itself. Her scars, her pride, the fire in her smile, she wasn't victim or damsel. She was flame daring him closer. Finally, her smirk softened. You should hate me. Most men do. But you don't. You look at me as if you're afraid of what you see. His throat tightened. Afraid? Perhaps, of her, or himself, he no longer knew. The fire dimmed, wind pressed the shutters. Still they sat, silent, stretched, and charged. Ruby leaned back, smiling faintly as if she'd already won something greater than freedom. Luke closed his eyes, weary. When he opened them, she was still watching, sharp, yet almost tender. And in that look he felt the ground beneath him crumble. For the first time in years, Luke realized he was no longer sure who he was, or what he wanted. Morning bled into the cabin, pale light slipping through the shutters. Luke hadn't slept. Revolver across his lap, he faced Ruby bound to the chair. Her hair was tangled, lips chapped, yet her green fire refused to dim. It was time for answers. Tell me where your gang rides. Names. Camps. Routes. Ruby smirked. You saved me, patched me up, and now want me to betray the only family I've got. That's not how loyalty works, cowboy. Loyalty doesn't excuse murder. She tilted her head. And yet, here I sit alive because you couldn't let me bleed out. What does that say about your loyalty, to the law, or to me? The words cut deep. Luke paced, then stood before her. You think you can play me? But I'm not some drifter you can charm. Ruby laughed, soft as smoke. Aren't you? Last night you could have shot me. Instead you held me, looked at me like, her smile softened. Like a man unsure if he wants to catch me or keep me. His throat tightened. No reply. If you want answers, she said, voice low, you'll have to take them from me. And it won't be with questions. She leaned forward, brushing his lips, light as a whisper, searing as fire. For a heartbeat the kiss deepened, daring him to surrender. When she pulled back, silence roared. Luke's chest heaved. Against reason, against every code, he loosened the ropes. Ruby flexed her freed hands but didn't flee. She touched his cheek. You've no idea what you've just done, she whispered. His mind screamed warning, but his body leaned closer, drawn to the danger. For a fragile moment, the cabin was no prison, no battleground, only flame balance between warmth and ruin. And when Luke untied her hands, his fate was sealed. For a breathless instant after Luke freed her hands, the cabin felt suspended in silence. Ruby's green eyes softened, her fingers tracing his cheek as though to hold the moment forever. Luke's heart pounded, his defenses cracked wide open. He had never been so close to anyone so dangerous, and he no longer cared. but Ruby did. Her smile flickered, not tender, but sharp. Before Luke could move, a hand shot from his cheek to the back of his neck. She pulled him close as if for another kiss, but her knee drove into his chest with brutal precision. The air exploded from his lungs. Staggering, he tried to lift his revolver, but she struck again with the heavy lamp. Stars burst across his vision, and the world collapsed into ringing darkness. When Luke crumpled, Ruby stood over him, chest heaving. Her bandaged side bled anew, but she ignored it, gulping air like a wild animal tasting freedom. "I warned you, cowboy," she murmured, brushing hair from her face. "Never trust a wolf." She snatched his revolver, spun it once, then tossed it on the bed as if to mock him. Her eyes lingered on Luke's still form. For a heartbeat, hesitation shadowed her face. Then she turned cold as steel. Kicking the door open, Ruby strode into the night. The moon cast her in silver, boots striking hard against the packed earth. She crossed the yard, untying Luke's bay horse with a flick of her fingers. The animal snorted, but she swung into the saddle with practiced ease. For a moment she sat tall against the horizon, crimson scarf snapping in the wind like a banner of rebellion. Then she pulled the reins and spurred forward. The thunder of hooves split the night as she galloped away, firing 2 shots into the sky. The echoes rolled across the plains, sharp and mocking, a farewell written in smoke. Dust billowed behind her, glowing pale under the moon. Inside, Luke stirred, groaning as he rose. Blood trickled down his temple. He stumbled to the doorway just in time to glimpse Ruby, dark hair flying, pistol raised in salute, her figure swallowed by the night. He leaned against the frame, chest aching not from the blows but from the truth that cut deeper. He had given her the very chance she needed. His trust had undone him. His heart had undone him. The hoofbeats faded, leaving only the chirr of crickets and the echo of shots hanging in the night air. Luke staggered back inside. The fire had died to ash, the chair sat vacant, and the rope he had untied lay coiled like a snake on the floor. Luke sank to his knees, shame burning hotter than any wound. The town would never forgive him if they knew. He had captured Ruby, and let her go. The wind pushed through the broken door, carrying the scent of dust and powder. Luke closed his eyes, tasting betrayal, knowing it was not just Ruby who had deceived him. It was his own heart. The night dragged on, heavy and endless. Luke sat slumped against the cabin wall, head throbbing from the blow. Dry blood crusted at his temple, but he hardly noticed. The revolver lay untouched, the rope he had loosened coiled beside it. Each glance at it struck him with shame. The fire had died to embers, leaving the room wrapped in cold. He forced himself to rise and feed wood into the hearth. Flames sparked again, shadows retreating, but warmth no longer reached him. The cabin felt hollow, echoing with the ghost of her laughter. Ruby's scent lingered, leather, dust, something wild like sage after rain. Luke pressed a hand to his chest as if to smother the memory. She had been here, bound and beaten, and he had chosen not mercy but weakness. And weakness had cost him everything. He splashed his face from the basin, hoping the shock might clear his mind. But no water could wash away the memory of her kiss, the fire it lit, or the way his heart betrayed his judgment. Outside, Luke leaned on the doorframe, staring across the plain. The moon sank cold and pale, casting silver over the empty yard. Somewhere, Ruby rode free, carrying his failure like a prize. He pictured her scarf streaming, her laughter swallowed by night. The corral stood empty, tracks cutting across the land. He could follow, but his legs felt rooted, heavy with more than exhaustion. He knew he wasn't chasing her for the law, and that truth cut deeper than a blade. When dawn bled across the horizon, Luke dragged himself inside. He sank by the fire, staring at the ashes. The sun lit the cabin, exposing cracked boards, the rough-hewn table, the bed that still bore her imprint. Everything reminded him of the outlaw who had outwitted him, and the man who let it happen. By noon, word would spread. The passengers would tell the sheriff, the saloon would buzz, the whole town would know Luke had caught Ruby, and she had slipped away. They would laugh, call him careless, maybe coward. But none would know the truth. It wasn't skill or courage that doomed him. It was his heart. Luke closed his eyes, the weight of it pressing like the desert sky. For the first time in years, he doubted himself, doubted the code that had been his compass. He had looked into an outlaw's eyes and seen not just danger, but something he could not resist. Now he was left with silence and shame. The wind whistled through the cabin walls. Luke leaned forward, face in his hands, letting the silence consume him. He knew this was not the end. Ruby's shadow would follow him, as surely as the memory of her kiss burned in his blood. His life had been divided in two, the man before Ruby, and the man left after she was gone. By the time Luke rode into town on a borrowed mule, the story had already spread like wildfire. The saloon buzzed, laughter rolling from table to table. Luke caught the bandit girl, someone said, and she slipped through his fingers like smoke. Others added lies, how she tied him to his chair, stole his boots, mocked him with a bow. Each retelling grew wilder, fed by whiskey and gossip. Luke walked through the chatter with his hat low. He ordered a drink, ignored the smirks, endured the slaps on his back that carried more pity than respect. Better they believed he was careless than ever know the truth, that he had untied her with his own hands. The sheriff cornered him outside, eyes narrow. "You had her, Luke. Folks trusted you. What happened?" Luke met his stare. "She was faster than I expected. No excuses." The sheriff studied him, spat into the dust, and walked away. Word spread beyond town. Travelers carried the tale down the road, spinning it for coins. Soon, everywhere Luke went, whispers followed, the cowboy who caught Ruby and let her slip away. Some mocked, some pitied, a few admired the outlaw who fooled them all. But no one knew the truth. Nights in the cabin grew lonelier. Luke sat by the fire, staring at the rope still coiled on the table, at the chair where she had laughed, at the bed that once carried her weight. Every detail lingered, the flash of green eyes, her defiant laugh, the warmth of her lips. He had faced storms and gunfights, but nothing haunted him like Ruby. He told himself she was just another outlaw, destined to be caught or killed. Yet the thought brought no comfort, only an ache he couldn't name. Deep down, he wondered if she still thought of him, or if she had already forgotten, galloping free under endless skies. The town forgot quickly, as towns do. New crimes, new rumors, new drifters came. But Luke carried the weight in silence. To others, he was the cowboy who failed. To himself, he was the man who had once looked into a bandit's eyes and found not hatred, but something dangerously close to love. When he rode the plains now, the wind carried whispers only he could hear, Ruby's voice, teasing and defiant. He never told a soul. Some stories were too heavy for the world. Some stayed locked in the heart. And so Luke bore his secret alone, that one night in the Wild West, he hadn't just lost a prisoner. He had lost to his own heart.